Welcome to the Work Positive Podcast with your host, executive coach, and culture architect, Dr. Joey Faucette. Discover strategies and tactics that work positive as Dr. Joey talks with industry leaders who create a positive work culture that attracts top talent and reduces team turnover. Discover how you can create a work positive culture that increases productivity and profits. Here's your host, Dr. Joey.
Hey, Work Positive Nation. When I am recording this, it's around the Thanksgiving time of year here in the U.S. I know not everyone all over the world celebrates Thanksgiving the way that we do. It's a distinctly American holiday, and yet gratitude is always in season, correct? So today on this episode of the Work Positive Podcast, I'd like to give thanks for my previous guests. There have been 7 incredible people who have given of their time and really poured into all of us in Work Positive Nation to help us create a positive work culture that increases productivity and profits so that we attract top talent and reduce team turnover, right? And so I just want to give each of them a shout out by remembering their episodes. Now, certainly you're welcome to go back and listen to whatever podcast aggregator you use, wherever a fine podcaster heard, right? But I just want to give you a little bit of my takeaway, my insights from theirs. And some of them are quite hilarious. And so let's begin with Gary Ridge. Gary Ridge is the recently retired CEO and chairman of WD-40. In fact, he was on his way out the door after a long time career, 20, 25 years, something like that at WD-40. And he's known as the culture coach. One of the things that I really appreciated about Gary was his explanation, especially focused around a book that he and Ken Blanchard wrote called The Unexpected Learning Moment. And he basically recasts all of our, let's say, failure is probably the most common word, right? All of our failed attempts at getting results. And so what he does is he recasts those, which literally transforms our minds to understand them as learning moments, because we discovered that this didn't work as well as we wanted. And so, where do we go from here? So he really put that in a collaborative environment in which coaches, they no longer use the word managers at WD-40, and I think that's an important distinction. Coaches would help team members to unpack learning moments, to grab the handle, as I like to say, and flush the rest of it. That's the Dr. Joey 2-step, by the way. Whatever experience you have, grab the handle, that is, what's the lesson you can learn, and then flush. What are you flushing? The negativity, the worthlessness, the shame, any shame you might feel around not getting the results that you wanted. So Gary really cast that as learning moments. Now, he and Dr. Blanchard refer to those as unexpected learning moments, and Gary went into why all that's happening, because we typically don't know when things aren't going to turn out the way we anticipated. And so those are unexpected, and yet, man, that's where the richness lies. Now, the most hilarious moment in my Work Positive Podcast interview with Gary Ridge for me was when he was talking about, and I can't remember the guy's name, but one of his team members was having an off day, and it was one of his leaders, and they had sat in a meeting, and this guy was just what I would call an Eeyore vampire, right? Nothing was going to work. Nothing was going to go right. And so Gary invited the guy to go with him to lunch or to grab a coffee or something like that. And so they go outside to get in the car, and Gary walks all around the car, opens the trunk and looks in there and is looking under the car. And the guy says, "What are you doing?" Gary says, "I'm looking for my friend," insert name here. "I can't seem to find him. He's lost today." I love using humor as transformational learning experiences. And so, man, that just, rather than beating up on the guy and saying, "What's wrong with you today, man? Your attitude sucks," Gary instead used humor to play that off. And I just absolutely love that. So those are some of my takeaways from the Gary Ridge Work Positive Podcast interview. Ivan Meisner. I've known Dr. Ivan Meisner for a while, and he's the founder of BNI, the world's largest referral marketing organization. He's an incredible human being, absolutely is. And one of the key things that I learned in the second episode of the Work Positive Podcast from Dr. Meisner was this notion that when we delegate, and that's something that we as entrepreneurs have to learn. It's something that we as HR professionals need to learn. Leaders at any level in any organization is delegation. Ivan says that the key is to delegate responsibility with authority. Typically, we find ourselves delegating responsibility. Okay, Joey, here's something you have to do. This is what you must get done, right? So there's the task assignment, and whoever's delegating that task to me expects me to get it done. If I don't have the authority, or if I lack the authority to pull a team together to accomplish it, or to ensure that others participate in this task for which I'm responsible, then the odds, the likelihood of my success are very, very limited. Ivan says whenever you delegate, make sure that responsibility and authority traffic together, and that others know that you're being held responsible, or the person to whom you're delegating is being held responsible for the accomplishment of that goal, and has the authority to invite other people to join, to give their time and giftedness to make that task happen as well. So that was a real key insight, and a huge takeaway for me is to make sure when I'm delegating that I'm not holding back authority, which is what we do so often, that person is empowered to be able to make decisions that accomplish that goal that for which they're responsible. Now, with all of our guests, I ask them about the one thing, what's the one thing Work Positive Nation can do today to create a positive work culture? And I absolutely loved Ivan's one thing. And there's a backstory to it that I actually shared with him, and we laughed about it after the recording was over. Ivan's one thing, go back and listen to the episode. By the way, he drops an acre of diamonds in quotes. It's like a quote reel. If you just pause it, whether you're watching it or listening to it, just pause it and write stuff down that he says, or type it into a quotes file. Use it to encourage yourself, focus yourself. But his one thing that he encouraged us in Work Positive Nation to do was to do 6 things 1,000 times rather than 1,000 things 6 times. Do 6 things 1,000 times rather than 1,000 things 6 times. Now, his point there is all about focus. You must know yourself well enough to find those 6 things that you're really good at, passionate about, things like that, and then go do them. Do them 1,000 times. Now, the funny backstory on this is I was in Austin, Texas with Ivan and his wife, Beth, and we were at the W and had a nice meal together. Beth has since passed, by the way, and I miss her dearly, as does Ivan, and we enjoy sharing stories about what a lovely, lovely person she was. So Beth invites me to ride with her back to my hotel rather than getting a lift. So I said, okay. And we go out in the parking lot, and she's got this Dallas Cowboy blue Corvette. I forget what year model it was, but Beth loved that car. So we get in the car and we're riding along, and I'm even though it's Dallas Cowboy blue, right? I'm enjoying riding in the car. And just out of the blue, literally, Beth says to me, Ivan always says do 6 things 1,000 times rather than 1,000 things 6 times. I get so bored with that. I enjoy doing a lot of different things. What about you? So anyway, we laughed over that story about Ivan's one thing. The point is, though, that we focus. And so that's how we create a positive work culture that truly increases productivity and profits, is to find our 6 things and do them 1,000 times. So thanks, Ivan, for the great memory. Thanks for helping us focus. And Work Positive Nation, what are your 6 things? Jesse Cole. Now, I got to tell you, I've interviewed a lot of people over the years of doing podcasts, but this next guest, my 3rd episode, featured the first person I've ever interviewed who literally wore a yellow tuxedo with a top hat, not just a shirt and coat and tails and pants, with a top hat. And boy, is he quite well known for it. In fact, he wrote a book called Find Your Yellow Tux. His other book, Fans First, I've read both of them. I highly recommend both of them to you. Jesse Cole, the owner of the Savannah Bananas, was my guest in my 3rd episode of the Work Positive podcast. Jesse is a living embodiment of his recurring theme throughout his books and throughout this podcast episode. Go back and listen to it, and you'll hear Jesse saying time after time after time, whatever's normal, do the opposite. In fact, he would say, do the exact opposite, right? And, that really challenged me because so often I allow other persons to determine how we do things in our company because it's just that expected norm. Now, understand doing the exact opposite takes a lot of courage, some bravado. It takes a lot of personal security. But in your work Positive Nation, find ways of doing the exact opposite rather than being a lemming or, an also-ran. Just go find a way of accomplishing the same goals. Just go outside of your comfort zone, get outside of the box and go do it. Shortly after our third podcast episode of the Work Positive podcast with Jesse Cole, owner of the Savannah Bananas, aired, he and the Savannah Bananas announced a coast-to-coast tour. And just yesterday, the day before I'm recording this, they added 4 or 5 more dates. There are about 250,000 people who've already signed up for pre-sale tickets. They don't know if they're going to get the tickets, right? But they're pre-sale tickets for all of these dates all over the country. So they obviously are entertaining their fans in a miraculous way. Now, Jesse Cole's one thing that he told us in Work Positive Nation to go and do was to take up our phones and record a short video and send it to somebody. He especially wanted us to send it to a team member who's doing an exceptional job or somebody who might not get a lot of recognition, but is just really consistent in doing their work day after day after day. I literally took that to heart and sent Jesse a video message before I even stepped out of this studio. He appreciated that. And I've just made that a habit. I've tried to do it daily, but frankly, I haven't. But I've done it at least weekly. Just sending a video message to somebody and saying, hey, just want to let you know I was thinking about you today. Here are the things I appreciate about you. I'm grateful for you. Here's why. Something like that. Especially our team members. And then also clients. I do it with clients and customers too. In fact, my wife and I were recently at the beach celebrating my birthday. We work with a financial services company. My company works with a financial services company doing coach training, and they're located over in Africa. And one of the countries is Ghana, where they are, and Mozambique and Lesotho. And one of them lives like I call it a tropical paradise. I mean, right outside the office are all these palm trees and what have you. So I shot a short video of myself on the beach and made sure I got some tropical trees, right? Those palm trees in the background, and sent it to them and said, hey, look, I found paradise too. Missing you guys, want you to know how much I appreciate you and those kinds of things. So it was an amazing opportunity to literally use that tactic, that technique that Jesse Cole taught us. Here's one thing in the third episode of the Work Positive podcast. Julie Balke. In the fourth episode of the Work Positive podcast, Julie Balke was my guest. I actually read her comments about work culture, workplace culture online in a news article from a major news source. And I said, wow, I'd like to get to know her. So as I got to know her, the next thing I knew, we were inviting her to be on the Work Positive podcast. One of my huge takeaways from her was Julie encourages, particularly those of us who are in the recruitment and attraction space, seeking top talent. Don't just work on seeking top talent. Go to the current teams and ask them, why are you working here? Another way of thinking about that is, why do you stay here? What's going on with you? And you find those excellent qualities, at least you hope you do, that the company has that's attracting top talent and reducing team turnover, which is so key. Because you can have your front door X size, but if your back door is 3X, 4X, then, you're constantly recruiting and attracting people. So I really like that Julie talked about asking people why they stay. I think that's a great survey question and something that you can take right into your team conversations. However it might be, just have a Zoom call where you get people together, get teams together and say, hey, why are you guys still here? Of course, it might be, I've tried to leave and I couldn't find another job. I suppose that could be an answer. But, with the great resignation leading now to the great regret and all the talk about the chat about quiet quitting, I think it's important to know why people stay. And once you discover those golden nuggets of why they stay, then of course you can share those as testimonials with persons whom you're trying to attract as top talent. But also you can do more of it and say, hey, they appreciate this. Instead of doing it once a year, let me do it once a quarter or something like that. Now, I want to call attention to Julie's book. It's for those of you who may be looking for another position, which apparently there still are lots of us doing that. Julie's book, I just love it for the title. Now, it's got a lot of great content in it. Please read it for the content. The subtitle really tells you a lot about what the content's all about. Avoiding the 7 mistakes that screw up your job search. Avoiding the 7 mistakes that screw up your job search. But the title, you talk about an attention grabber. I mean, I've written 8 books. I wish I had used this for my title. Stop peeing on your shoes. I absolutely love that title of that book. So if you're considering looking for a job, maybe you need some guidance, or you get a little fear around it, something like that, Julie will help you stop peeing on your shoes and avoid those 7 mistakes that screw up your job search. She's an amazing guest on the 4th episode of the Work Positive podcast. Larry Levine. On the 5th episode of the Work Positive podcast, my guest was Larry Levine, whom I've known for a while and is kind of like a brother from another mother. We used the same barber. By the way, if you're just listening to this, it'll make a lot more sense if you look at the YouTube video. But anyway, Larry's just an amazing guy. His book is Selling from the Heart, and that's really a movement that he's creating. So often salespeople are what Larry refers to as empty suits. And so he's really leading this movement of selling from the heart that instills authenticity and trust in the relationship, other positive values, and then literally does sales training that helps companies align their values so that they attract more persons with authenticity, and really focuses on developing relationships with customers or clients as opposed to just trying to make a transaction. So it becomes transformational at that point. I particularly like Larry's notion of creating internal mentor coach networks. Now, with our company, we spend a lot of time helping companies develop internal networks for coaching. My coaching partner, Jane Cresswell, founded the IBM Coaches Network that has like 5,000 people in it today, over 17 time zones. So we know a little bit about helping create a positive coaching culture within a company. Larry has taken that and created a microcosm of that within sales teams so that you have mentor coaches internally who are working to ensure authenticity and trust in the types of positive core values that a company wants to have in its sales team. So quotable quote, and goodness, I use this probably once a week with people. Soft skills drive hard dollars. Isn't that awesome? That's a Larry Levine quote. Feel free to use it. I'm sure he would appreciate it if you would attribute it to the Selling from the Heart movement. And yet Larry's just such a generous guy. He'd say, no, as long as you get the gold out of it, and use it and apply it and share it with other people who will, it's fine. Soft skills drive hard dollars. That was from Larry Levine, my guest on the 5th episode of the Work Positive podcast. Jamie Weeks. Jamie Weeks was my guest on the 6th episode of the Work Positive podcast. I don't get real emotional. I mean, I get happy and I have fun on the Work Positive podcast, but I don't get real emotional, other emotions during these podcasts. But I got to tell you, interviewing Jamie, man, I got a little misty-eyed. That happened at a particular moment in the interview. And go back and listen to the whole thing so that you can catch all the context of it. But Jamie was talking about how, as a business owner and an entrepreneur, he was egotistical. It was all about him. He used people, anything but humble and empathetic, which are 2 values as a culture curator that he really instills into all of his companies now and helps other companies do the same thing. So Jamie's all about humility and empathy. So I listened to him describing himself as having been egomaniacal previously and hard driving on people. And I just asked him this question because I'm an executive coach. That's what I do. I ask powerful questions, right? I just said, Jamie, what was the transforming moment for you when you moved from egotistical to humble and empathetic? And I got to tell you, his answer just stunned me. He got really quiet and he looked down for a moment and then he raised his head and he said, when my mom died. And then he unpacked what that meant. Now, when I was talking to Jamie, my mom had COVID and was in the hospital for 3 days and had just come out of that. And we still weren't sure she was going to make it. So I know why it, tugged on my heartstrings so much, but it just reminded me that we are people, regardless of how many businesses we own or how we do business or whatever, we're people. And so I guess this is back to Gary Ridge's learning moments, right? That was an unexpected learning moment for Jamie Weeks. And he literally was transformed by his mother's death. So even out of death, new life can come. And that's really Jamie's emphasis. This is about life balance. I love the 3 questions he asked whenever he's interviewing someone. Let me make sure I get these right. He asked these 3 questions. What was your first car? You find out how humble somebody is then, right? What was your first concert? I guess that's kind of a humble question too, but anyway, I told him mine was Willie Nelson, by the way. So I don't know what that says about me. I don't know whether he'd hire me or not. The third one was, what's one movie you could watch for the rest of your life? I love that because, that just sorts through a whole lot. You learn a lot about people when you find out the first car they drove, the first concert they attended in their favorite movie, right? That they could watch for the rest of their life. So that was Jamie Weeks. Man, I learned a lot from him. Be sure to check him out. He's written several books as well. So at least he's got a book out by now, a new book out by now. So be sure to check out Jamie Weeks, who was my guest on that episode of the Work Positive podcast. Mitchell Levy. So Mitchell Levy was my guest on the 7th episode of the Work Positive podcast. And one huge takeaway for me with Mitchell, he's all about credibility and Credibility Nation. Does an amazing job at helping people develop credibility and have it in their work. So his focus on likability and respect really drove home a lot for me. First of all, because I love Tim Sanders. He is one of my favorite business authors. I wish Tim, if you're ever listening to this, please hurry up and write another book, right? He wrote a book called The Likability Factor some years ago. And basically it states that we do business with people we like. Okay, so you can flip that over and say we work with people we like. And that's the way most of us want to work and want to do business. It's a lot easier, more seamless. So Mitchell began talking about that likability factor and how we can attract people whom we like by becoming a person that we like, right? So it's that internal, external dialogue. But also he talked about respect. And I thought that combination of likability and respect is so important, particularly in light of all of the conversations that are going on in the U.S. right now about politics and what have you. I don't have to agree with you to respect you, right? Compliance of opinion and conformity of opinion is not necessary, right, for me to respect you. And so in the workplace, wow, it takes a lot of diversity, doesn't it? And people coming from different types of backgrounds with different skill sets and all to get the work done. Well, let's respect one another, or as I like to say, let's put down our hammer and chisel that we use trying to carve other people into our image and just allow them to be themselves and love them for who they are, right? What a huge boost in credibility and how much more likable we become when we put down our hammer and chisel and respect other people for the immense value that they bring to the work task in our company. Likability and respect, Mitchell says, are the 2 pillars of credibility. I absolutely love that. Also, go back and listen to his conversation about integrity. And he does a masterful job of talking about internal versus external integrity. So that's ensuring, in my mind at least, that your walk and your talk are consistent. And I love that. One other thing I loved about Mitchell Levy, first of all, he's a lot of fun. He's a great guy. We talked as long before or longer before we recorded the podcast than we did during the podcast, and talk some more afterwards. So he's hugely likable, and he rocks a fedora. Okay, I'm just going to tell you that. If you're listening to this, go to our YouTube channel at Work Positive. That's right. Just put in Work Positive on YouTube and you'll find it. This dude rocks a fedora. In fact, I got to tell you, I had a little hat envy. I just wear ball caps most of the time. Mitchell rocks a fedora, man. So When I grow up, I want to be Mitchell Levy and rock a fedora. So those are my takeaways and insights, and how much fun I had with the first 7 guests on the Work Positive podcast. Hopefully this has helped you go back and listen, or intrigued you enough to go back and listen, go find an episode you didn't get a chance to listen to. Hopefully you'll subscribe, give us a 5-star rating if we're doing a 5-star job. If we're not, in your opinion, email me at drjoey@workpositive.today. That's DRJOUI at workpositive.today. Tell me how I can improve, okay? Because we're here to serve you as Work Positive Nation, because you're all about why we exist, and that is to help you create a positive work culture that increases productivity and profits so that you can attract top talent and reduce team turnover. Thanks so much for listening to this episode, and wonder who my guest is next week. Thank you for listening to the Work Positive Podcast with your host, executive coach, and culture architect, Dr. Joey Faucette. Please share this podcast with your friends who are small business leaders so they can create a positive work culture that increases their productivity and profits. Get your free 15-point Work Positive checklist to help you attract top talent and reduce team turnover. Download this checklist at workpositive.today/checklist. Remember, it pays to work positive.